God made all things and is present in all things. Does that mean that all things are God's children? We speak of the whole world being God's children, but then we speak more specifically about Israel and Christians as being God's children. And then sometimes we speak even more specifically about Jesus Christ as God's only child. Similarly, we speak of baptism as adoption into the household of God. So which one is it? Were we children already, or do we become children in baptism? I won't ask you to raise hands. In a similar way, we talk about Jesus saving the whole world, but we also speak about Jesus saving the faithful. Have any of you noticed that there's two different versions in the Eucharistic prayer? For the this is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for you and for many. Or, actually, I think we're using this today. All. Depending on how you translate the passage. So what do you think? Are all saved or only some? In my own work, I studied the definitions and meanings of life. And it's really interesting because Genesis starts with God doing something to get the whole ball rolling. What does God do? Breathes over the face of the deep. And do you know what God does to make animals? Breathes on them. And what does God do to make humans? Breathes on them. And we say that in baptism we get what? The Holy Spirit. And Spirit means breath. So this is really interesting. And we have to ask, is God's breath in everything? Or is God's breath just in us? Or is it different types of breath? It's not an easy question. So which is it? Is God everywhere or is God here? And we need to be really careful, because if we focus on God just being here, then we have a really good reason to tell people to come here. And I don't know about you, but I think it's good to come here. So that's one good reason to say God is here. But if we say God is only here, all sorts of bad things sort of fall out of that. God may be doing other things. What do you think? Probably. On the other hand, if we just say God is everywhere, well, that's good, because then we look for God everywhere. But what's the downside? Why get baptized? Why come to church? Why make an effort at all? So how do we balance these two things, God everywhere and God here? So I want to say that baptism is right and good and a joyful thing, but maybe not the only thing God is doing in the world. And I want to say that Episcopalians fundamentally get something right, but I'm not sure we get everything right. And so it's worth paying attention to other folks as well. So how do I find that balance? And I'm going to suggest that today's readings give us a hint. And part of that has to do with God moving. So we tend to think of God as a thing because we like to think of things, and we think of them being in one place. So grace and family, salvation and spirit, these are things that you have or don't have, something that is present or is absent. But all of them, I'm going to suggest, are things that are moving. And so we have to think about the process of how they move. That grace flows from God into the world, making us part of the process. We are adopted so that we might adopt others. We are saved so that we might participate in the salvation of others. We are alive so that we might enliven others. Jesus said to his disciples, "As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. I have said these things to you so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be made complete." So perhaps there's no such thing as static love, only love moving and being moved. So at the risk of being a little bit cliche, I am going to say love is like a river. It is something that constantly flows. And so being in love is like being in a river. Baptism marks us as God's own. But I think sometimes the symbol of baptism can mislead us. Because after we do the baptism, what's the first thing that we do? We usually dry the person off. Now, I admit that's the practical thing to do. But there's something to think about what it means to being put in that living water and staying in that living water. What is it within us that our participation, our baptism, turns us into that living water so that when we walk into the desert, the water is still with us? I'm going to turn literal for a moment because I'm a biologist, and I'm going to say we are all made out of largely water. All of our cells, mostly water. Our blood, mostly water. The food and drink that we have are mostly water. And so we are in this constant process in our breathing and in our eating and drinking and in the flow of our blood in this flux of water. And that's part of what it means to be alive, to be part of that dynamic process. So becoming figurative again, I'm going to say love is something like this. We are made of love. We are in this process of love. We say on a regular basis, hopefully every day, "Forgive us our trespasses,
we forgive those who trespass against us."
And it's really easy to think of that as a transaction, to think that somehow God's forgiveness of us is something God does after we forgive others. And there's something to that. I'm not saying that's not true, but there's something else important about the fact that we find it difficult to be forgiven and to understand that we are forgiven until we are forgiving others. The two processes are intertwined because love and forgiveness flowing into us and love and forgiveness flowing out of us are two things that happen and probably must happen together as we are in this flow of grace. Forgiveness is love in action. So I can say that sacraments like baptism and like reconciliation and forgiveness are concrete and visible signs of an invisible grace that is flowing everywhere. We use them as ways of priming the pump and remembering and reminding and acting out that river of love and grace that we are always a part of. Grace is everywhere, but grace does more than sit there. Grace moves. So it's tempting, because we like to think of things as things and objects, to think that the church is such a thing. It is a building, or it is a set group of people and no one else. Hopefully none of you think that, but you've probably heard it on the radio sometime in the past month or so. Or to think that it's a fixed set of things that we believe, or a fixed set of things that we must do. And those are important. I like buildings. I like doctrines. I like communities. And I like actions, like sacraments. But none of those is worth dying for. but the church as a process, as this community that is working out its own growth, as God moving into the world, as us thinking not for the sake of thinking, but for the sake of relationships, and us doing not for the sake of doing, but doing for the sake of relationships. That, I think, is worth dying for. I know myself. I know that I am not yet ready to see God in all things. I'm not quite up to seeing God in all people, but hopefully I'm getting close. So what I do is I focus on God expanding my ability to see God in all things and in all people. I focus not on God already being there, which God already is, but on God breaking into those things and breaking into the world through those things. And I focus on concrete acts of love. What is my role in adoption and reconciliation? What are the things that I can do, the things that we can do to participate in this process of grace and love? Jesus said, I have called you friends because I have made known to you everything that I have heard from my Father. We have not been called to simple obedience, though we have been called to obedience. There are no boxes to check off in this process of salvation. Sorry, there is no master list. We have been given both more and less, because Jesus has shared with us God's goal of reconciliation of the whole world to God's self, and reconciliation of all creatures with one another. And this is what we are asked to lay down our lives for. That vision that Jesus laid down his life for. Grace, relationship, oneness with God. It's a tough job. It's even annoying on occasion. It requires more than simple obedience, but creativity and flexibility. It requires stepping into the river and getting carried away. It's the kind of thing one does for a friend. It's also exactly the sort of thing that friendships are founded on. Have you ever noticed that asking for a favor or receiving a favor is one of the best ways to form a friendship? Every time you're there for one another, you strengthen the bond, you deepen the relationship. So when's the last time you risked something for a friend? When's the last time you were willing to let a friend risk something for you? It's not easy, but it may be the only way to form true friendships. When's the last time you asked God for a favor? Not just in passing, but genuinely asked God for a favor. When's the last time you did something dangerous for God? It's scary. I think it may be necessary if we want to get caught up in this process of love. At the end of the day, we may need to get carried away.